Well, hello there. My name is Ian, and welcome to my YouTube channel. So today, I've assembled a cast of co-hosts, panelists, to talk about the new Steven Wilson remix of Tales from Topographic Oceans by Yes. From Life and Surround, I've got Mike Vieira from ImmersiveAudioAlbum.com. Mr. Jonathan Cornell is back. And of course, moderator of the Quad Forums, Ryan Talbot is here to give his impressions. So I thought we would kick off the video by talking about this in a general sense. Let's compare this in some ways to the 5.1 mix, which I have here. And then I think it would be really fun if each of us chose a side of the record to sort of present upon, and we can talk into detail about it. So let's just get underway. How do we feel about this mix?
Well, I feel great about this mix. It's a Steven Wilson remix of classic Yes, and he has nailed it. My one critique would be that the bottom end for part 1 is a little bit less in control than parts 2, 3, and 4. And I go into that in the breakout review I did with Ronan. Mm-hmm. So other than that, this mix is one that should be heard by Yes fans, who are into immersive or surround audio. And I'll have much more to say, but thumbs up from me just at the get-go.
I haven't heard the 5.1 mix in a little while, but I've heard it very recently. Actually, I listened to it quite a bit within the past year, and my impressions is that the 5.1 mix felt further away. Whereas this one, the Atmos mix feels close up to me, and it allows me to get closer to this music and to understand and appreciate it better. And I feel that the rhythm section is really well served by Steven Wilson's new mix. I can hear Chris Squire, which I felt like he was barely audible at times, maybe in the old 5.1 mix, but he's very much up front, very prominent. And his playing is absolutely brilliant on this record. But I also want to highlight Alan White, who many Yes fans unfairly malign, basically because he's just not Bill Bruford. This mix, I think, should put that to rest. Alan White is absolutely sensational across this record.
I mean, he kind of got thrown in the deep end on this album, didn't he?
Yeah. Maybe Bill Bruford's machine gun style of, tom flourishes may not have sat as well on this record as Alan White's more kind of laid back approach. Though, Alan White, his drums are absolutely huge on this record, and his presence is always known. And there are moments of this record that are downright heavy, particularly like at the end of My Side, High the Memory. And like you were saying about Chris Squire's tone, he is an absolute beast at certain moments, like Cygnus X1 like style growl. And
another thing that I find, and this is true of all of Steven Wilson's Atmos mixes of late, like we were just talking about this with the Raven, he has his early 5.1 mixes were more about being respectful, keeping things kind of stagnant and grounded to the corners of the room. Whereas his Atmos mixes, he's allowed himself to be a lot more creative, particularly with the panning. And I feel like as we get into My Side, which is the Ancient, we're going to talk about some pretty radical and experimental panning that very much has roots in the original mix. And I don't know if any of you guys had a chance to listen to the original mix at all, but I did sample it. And I find it, compared to this new Atmos mix, I find the original mix to be maybe a little bit boxy and muffled, even though it was very good. Eddie Offord did a wonderful job. Whereas Steven's 2015, 5.1 mix is very bright. Whereas I feel like this new Dolby Atmos mix brings the warmth back of the original Eddie Offord mix. Mike, I know you had comments in your video about how the vocal mix seems a lot more put together for you.
Yeah, so for me, that's going to be actually the biggest upgrade over the Legacy 5.1 for Steven Wilson's first round of Yes surround remixes. I never once felt that he got the lead vocal and the harmonic vocal blend quite right. And that is just such a signature Eddie Offord sound that, that blend just has to be there. If somebody's like slightly out of tune or whatever, Offord knew how to tuck it in so that it still felt like it was in harmony. So I noticed some pitchiness, during Yes vocals for the first time listening to Wilson's original 5.1 mixes, and I didn't like it. And now I can get through this entire album and the pitchiness isn't there and the blend is. And so then also you had said that the original can be described as muffled, and I have to agree. I've always felt like one obstacle to really understanding this album has been that it has been obscured behind this veil of mist. And now I really think that we are able to take in all of the notation of the album. Sometimes Rick Wakeman is playing 4 keyboards at one time, and Wilson will pan 2 to the flanks and 2 up front for you. So, I mean, all you got to do is walk around the room and you can hear exactly what he's playing. Like, talk about like E-Power Biggs at the Cathedral, like 4 keyboards at once. He probably overdubbed them, but still, like, the mix spreads them out for you. So you, like you were saying, we have the clarity now, but also the warmth.
To your point about the vocals, and I was going to mention this when we get into the individual sides, but one of the differences I noticed with this record, maybe versus Close to the Edge and some of the earlier ones, is there's a lot more like doubling of vocal parts. So you listen to Close to the Edge, it's usually just like the 3 guys singing. You have John Anderson up the middle, usually Steve Howe on one side, Chris Squire on the other. There are some moments on Close to the Edge where John Anderson's voice is doubled. Either, I don't know if he sang it twice or they just used like an ADT effect. But on this record, usually the backing vocals are doubled as well. So you can get this effect where you have like, there's a different Chris Squire in the front and in the back. So instead of having 3 guys, you have kind of like 6 guys all around you. That kind of helps make it gel a little bit more. Because it is a little weird, I agree with you, though I like the effect of having the 2 guys in the back and 1 in the front. Like on a song like Siberian Khatru, where it's basically like the unison harmony is the lead vocal. Like it's not like the backing vocals come and go, like they're there the whole time. It is a little weird how spread out they are. And I think just the original production of the album kind of helps mitigate that on this record.
I was going to mention this is a 24-track recording, and it was the first Yes album to record it to 24 tracks. So they had a lot more options.
Well, I want to talk about that actually, if that's, a good way to get into that area, because it's one of the things that's very interesting to me as someone who's kind of into like music recording and production is to read about, how they used to make these records in the analog days and how skilled engineers were, because there were no computers. And, if you listen to Tales from Topographic Oceans, it's very evident that there are more than 24 sounds going on at any given time. So you wonder, like, how did they record it that way? Because typically you would think the way we would think records are made is like, if you're dealing with a 24-track tape, like each track would be devoted to a specific sound. Like channel 1 might be like the bass drum, channel 2 might be the snare, there might be a channel lead vocal, and so on. And that is how they recorded things. But my understanding is for records that would get more complex, like this one, what they would do is they would like drop people in places where there were like empty slots on the track. So for example, like say there's one channel of the tape, like channel 5, that has John Anderson's voice. But for all the moments where he's not singing, like you could fit other parts in there. Like you could drop in like a, percussion overdub, another guitar part, and so on. And there's an interview that Steven Wilson gave to the Sound on Sound magazine a couple years ago where he talked about the process of mixing this record. And they even showed pictures of some of the original track sheets to show like how they organized the tracks. And it's like, it's total chaos. Like each track might have like 6 or 7 instruments on it. And you have to imagine, like when they mixed it originally, somebody must have been sitting there with like a notepad, like that said exactly when each track would change instrumentation. Because say you wanted to time all these moves, like say channel 5 is lead vocal, but then like at bar 6, it switches to like a keyboard part and you want to push that keyboard part in the mix. The whole thing, it's like the mix was like a performance where you'd have like 3 or 4 people who would know exactly when the parts would come in, and you have to time your fader moves, time your pans. So the cool thing about going back and remixing a record like this is that you get the 24 track transfers, you can load them into whatever DAW, Pro Tools, Logic, and you can go in and slice up all the tracks and assign all the sounds onto their own channel. So like in this interview, Steven was saying like a song like Ritual, like the original was 24 tracks, but my session was like 100 tracks. By the time I put every little percussion hit and every punch on its own track. So you can, once you have the sound in its own channel, you can put your own EQ plugin on it, and in a way, like you can kind of get more out of it than they would have when they mixed it originally. Which isn't to say that like in the original mix they missed things. I'm sure it turned out exactly the way they wanted it at the time. But like organizationally, I think the advances in technology are part of the reason why I think there's such an improvement on this record going from the original to the Steven Wilson mix. Yeah. I mean, I agree with what all of you guys said. I think that Alan White is the biggest winner in all the remixes. The drums are kind of swallowed up in the original by all that sort of textural things, all the vocal stuff. And in this version, they really leap out of the mix, especially in surround, when you can have the toms panning all around you and you can really hear all the details.
Before we move on to talking about this record in depth, because I'm really looking forward to breaking down each side and talking about our favorite parts of the mix, but I thought we would just take a moment and talk about how we feel about this record in a general sense, because it's a very controversial record in terms of being a Yes fan or a progressive rock fan. And I first discovered it I probably was in high school, and I absolutely hated it the first time I heard it. And it put me off Yes for a very long time. And it's interesting, but as I was mentioning to you guys, I have probably listened to this album more times in the past year or even the past week than I have like in a lifetime. And I feel like this new Atmos mix has truly won me over. Now, I won't claim to understand the concept of the album, the Indian mythology that informs it, but I do get a strong spiritual sense from it. I mean, even the way that John Anderson sings is very soulful to me. And, I like Fragile. I love Close to the Edge, but I feel Tales from Topographic Oceans. There's something extremely moving to me about this record that you can't find on any other Yes record.
Yeah, he starts off the album with a mantra, so right on.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of those records that I'm always surprised ever got released, because I'm sure if you think about, the way bands were supposed to operate at that time and the way recording companies were supposed to operate at that time, like, you deliver an album like this to them, double record, one piece of music per side, and there's absolutely nothing commercial about it at all. There's nothing on this record that they could have pulled apart and said, oh, okay, yeah, we're going to lead with this as a single or put this on the radio.
It just wasn't meant to be commercial.
Yeah, it wasn't meant to be absorbed that way. And I feel like, this is the kind of album that it could only have come from that magical era of the early 70s,
Well, these guys, had just dropped Yes songs, and that's a triple live album that was doing very well, especially for the genre. So they did have some big cojones going into this session, and deservedly so. For a prog band, they had really just absolutely just hit the dreamland. Like I'm sure they felt like they could do whatever they wanted, and I'm glad that they went for it. I've come to view this album as like a super classic Yes album interspersed within like a movie soundtrack or mood music. There are these gold nuggets that once you're in that section, you're just like, yeah, man, this is amazing. And then and they made you wait a few minutes to get there.
Right.
And in a way that's kind of like, maybe the spiritual meditative part, because, there has to be that journey up the mountain before you find the epiphany.
And I agree with everything you say there. And I think that a lot of it has to do with listening to it on Blu-ray for the first time instead of switching vinyl records or switching, CD1, CD2. There's something about being able to take it in as an experience.
Yeah.
It almost got to the point where I felt like the song started to segue. Like the ending of side 2 kind of just sets you right up for that opening of side 3.
Bonk.
Yeah. And it became increasingly hard to listen to my chosen side out of sequence. I had to start taking in the whole thing. And, all this is to say that I don't subscribe to the idea that this should have been a one album set. I think part of its magic and its appeal to me is the time spent with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, the last time I listened to it, I tried to really think about how could this be edited down?
Yeah.
And I know it's easy to say there's a lot of filler on it. And I don't disagree that it's long, but if you actually start to think about it, it's kind of difficult to figure out which parts you would cut. And I'm sure everybody has different opinions on this.
Yeah.
Because like you said, a lot of the magic of it is the tension and release, the going up the mountain. If you cut it down too much, you would lose some of that. But go ahead, Mike.
I have a similar opinion in the sense that, I did listen through the extra material for the set, and those attempts at radio edits just don't work for me.
Mm-hmm.
I just want them to start at the beginning and build up and get me there the way they've always got me there.
But one thing I will sort of slightly disagree with you on is that it works better for me if you take a break between 2 and 3. I think if you think of it as side 1 and 2 as one record, and then 3 and 4 is another record. For me,
back in the day when I think it was 2016, maybe, when we had the original 5.1 mix, I actually broke this thing up into 4 different sessions. And I guess maybe my attention span has developed a little bit as I've sat with more and more progressive music. It requires, kind of building up your listening muscle for that.
Yeah.
So I did find it possible to get through all 4 sides in a session, but I actually did most of my listening to the Atmos this time. I actually broke it up into smaller sessions still.
One thing that I want to talk about, and I think this will be a good segue to open Jonathan's side, is that I really like the choice on the Atmos mix to have the ambient intro on the Revealing Science of God, because I had my my era, I guess you could say, where I dove deep into meditation. So when this record starts, I like that we have 2 minutes of just space.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that allows me to take deep breaths and just kind of settle in to the experience that I'm going to have. And when we're just dropped into it, like it is on the original mix, and even the old Steven Wilson 5.1 mix, it doesn't quite have that power to draw me in the way that the full version does.
But what you could do on the original 5.1 mix is, I don't know about on the DVD audio version, but on the Blu-ray version there was both.
You did have both.
So you could always advance to the new mix of Revealing Signs of God with the intro, and then kind of program back to tracks 2, 3, and 4. But yeah, no, I agree. I like having that introduction. It's a nice way, like you said, to kind of ease into the record rather than just dropping in immediately with the vocals, where you're dropping in immediately with the concept. And so, yeah, it's a nice way to sort of have a moment to ease into what's about to happen.
So my understanding is, and someone can correct me if I'm wrong, is that intro, the first time that was released, was not the previous Steven Wilson edition. There was early 2000s. Yeah.
It was on CD, I think, from 2002, 2003. There was a series of remasters that they did. I think that was the first time that they had that intro on there. Of course, I assume that intro was naturally cut because of the limitations of vinyl, to try to keep each side roughly about 20 minutes long or less for the playability of the vinyl and the grooves and whatnot. But yeah, I like the fact that finally stuck back on there again.
So those extra 2 minutes, those were mixed by Eddie Offord along with the rest of the album in 1973, and probably during mastering they were just this is too long, we have to cut. It wasn't like they got somebody to mix it for the multi-tracks in 2003.
I don't believe so.
Yeah.
No.
I mean, that would make sense. So you want to just sort of jump into side 1?
Absolutely.
Okay, well, I wanted to do side 1 because it's my favorite side. I mean, I really like the sort of main melody, the what happened to the song. I always that's probably my favorite part of this record.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, just to kind of cut to the chase, I'm sure people want to know, what are the differences? If you've got the 2016 Blu-ray, or if you're listening to the new Blu-ray in 5.1 and you don't have an Atmos set up, like what does the Atmos mix sound like? So, the people who follow what I do, whether it's the YouTube channel or the IA blog, probably know I have this sort of signature way I like to do these written reviews where I really dig into how things are placed, in an Atmos mix on a 714 setup. Because I figure, unfortunately, there aren't that many people that have such setups. So, I like the idea of trying to entice someone of what it might sound like. And maybe someone will read one of these reviews and think, I want to know what that sounds like. I should set up some extra speakers. But so I, when I listen to the albums, I take these very detailed notes and I try to organize it in a way like I'm sort of telling a story. And these Yes records are some of the hardest ones to do, like this one in Close to the Edge, because the instrumentation is so intricate. Mm-hmm. Particularly this record, it's kind of hard to really, there's a bit of a sensory overload thing going on, especially when you listen to it in surround. But as far as the differences go, the ones I noticed were that we mentioned that all the remixes in the 2026 version have the 2-minute intro before the vocals come in. Whereas on the 2016 Blu-ray, it was included as like a bonus track at the end of the playlist. Some other things I noticed, and this is common with a lot of the recent Atmos mixes that Steven has done, where he's gone back and redone an album, here he did in 5.1, is that a lot of the sort of hard left and right pans from the original mix are back that were centered on the original. So if you listen to the original 5.1 mix, like there's a lot of sections on side one where Rick Wakeman is playing like these two mini moog parts, like a high note and a low note. And on the original mix, they're, left and right. And on the first 5.1 mix, Steven had them usually like one was in the center channel and the other one was centered in the back. So it was kind of like the stereo turned sideways. And in these mixes, in both the 5.1 and the Atmos, we're back to just having them left and right. And the 5.1 mix, they're in the back. In the Atmos mix, usually one of them is in the sides and the other one is in the heights or something like that. There's also a couple interesting spots in the original mix where John Anderson's voice goes off to one side. Mm-hmm. Like when his vocal first comes in solo, like with no harmonies. I think the lyric is like called out a tune or something like that. And it goes off to the right side in the original mix. So I was wondering, like, when the Atmos is coming, I was like, is he really going to put the vocal on the right? But in the Atmos mix, it goes up. So instead of being in the center channel, it goes to the front heights. So I thought that was kind of a cool way to pay homage to the sort of weird panning in the original without moving it off center. And there's a couple of moments where that happens throughout the record where the lead vocals go up to the front heights. And typically that's a choice that wouldn't normally work, but because, John Anderson has this sort of like angelic voice, particularly in the sections where there's sparse instrumentation, it's cool and it adds a little extra dimensionality to it. So we always talk about, one of the things we love about Steven Wilson's mixing is his creativity. I think that's a great example of it. Couple other things I noticed, the Rick Wakeman like keyboard solo that happens around the 19-minute mark. In the original 5.1 mix, it has like a couple of extra bars that weren't on the original. And in this new one, it's edited back to the way it was on the 73 mix. I mean, it's an extra like 5 to 10 seconds. It's not a huge difference. But I had put the two 5.1 mixes against each other in a DAW session. I was like, why aren't they lining up? And it's because there's this one little section where the keyboard solo is a little bit longer. But yeah, so all the sections, like when the band first comes in, like just like in the original mix, Chris Squire's distorted bass is a little off to one side instead of just being in the center channel. You mentioned that you felt in the original 5.1 mix that the bass was sometimes not as present.
Yes.
And I wonder if that's because a lot of the bass parts are mixed into the center speaker in the original 5.1 mix, whereas in this one, they're in the fronts and not in the center. Generally, and like I noticed this just by picking apart the tracks on the computer, is that there are a lot of additional sounds in the center channel other than the lead vocal, which is kind of unusual for a Steven Wilson mix. Usually in his mixes, the center is like dry lead vocal and nothing else. Sometimes like solos, keyboards, guitars, things like that. But in this mix, like you can hear the dry bass going under the lead vocal for most of the song. And I wonder if that was intentional or not, but for whatever reason, he reverted it back to the usual, like it's in the front, phantom center, and the lead vocal is alone in the center channel. As far as, kind of how things are placed in the mix, we got into it a little bit already. kind of at the ground level, you've got Alan White's drums kind of all around you. Chris Squire's bass mainly in the front, but it's sort of pushed out a little bit, so it's not totally flat on the front wall. I mentioned before that a lot of the parts are doubled. So like there's these sections where there's 4 different harmony vocals in each of the 4 corners with height elevation. A lot of the steel guitar parts are 2 on top of each other. So usually one is in the front and one is in the back. So you really get a sense of how much overdubbing they did. Mm-hmm. And I had read on Wikipedia, I mean, I wonder what the source for this is, that apparently they did the basic tracks for this album in a week for all 4 songs.
Wow. And
then they spent 5 months just doing overdubs.
Wow.
So I don't know which of those is more unbelievable, that they did the basics in a week or that they spent months just doing overdubs. But when you listen to the Atmos mix, you can hear how much they put on it.
Yeah.
And typically the height speakers are mostly like textural things that Rick Wakeman's doing. You know, Mini Moog. A lot of pretty much all the Mellotron parts are in the heights. Mm-hmm. And then there's other sections where he's playing like a more traditional piano sound. I don't know if it's an acoustic piano or if it's like a keyboard with a piano sound, but typically those tend to pop up in the sides, which is really cool. So you get these moments where there's different guitars front and back. Then you have the sort of piano filling in from the middle. Lots of moments where things move around. During that whole like starlight movement section with the vocals in the first side, there's like a little keyboard effect that ping pongs around the 4 height speakers. I mean, you know, you could spend a whole hour-long video just picking apart the way.
Is that the squeaker toy sound? Sounds
yes.
Like a dog squeaker toy.
I mean, I thought that was some kind of synth effect. Maybe it's a percussion thing. I don't know. I mean, the last thing I'll mention is that I agree with you guys about the sort of tonality difference between the various versions. The original 73 mix, kind of boxy, kind of muddy. Then you have the Steven Wilson 2016 mix where it's much more detailed, but it's a little too bright.
Yeah.
Particularly, not so much in this side, but on some of the later parts of the album, like throughout side 3, or especially at the end of side 4 with that big, the part with all the percussion gets to be pretty harsh. And I feel like he found a happy balance on this one where it's got the like brightness, crispness, extra detail that you want without it becoming too harsh. So safe to say, you know, this is never going to be my favorite Yes record, but this is the most that I've enjoyed the album listening to the Atmos mix.
Nice.
And I'm glad to have it, and I'm excited for Relayer and Atmos.
I feel like this side of the album is all about drawing you in, and from a strictly like immersive perspective, I found this one to be maybe less extreme and maybe less experimental than some of the other sides, as you know we'll talk about. But that suits the music. I did notice that it seemed like the ambient intro with the waves coming in, that definitely did feel like it was all around me, with maybe the synths and the heights and maybe the waves coming in the back. Also, I love the way that the vocals are spread all around, and you can pick out that it's John, that it's Chris, and it's Steve, but they blend well, which is important. Moving forward, something that you didn't mention is that the very almost sawtoothed Mini Moog solo is definitely coming down from the heights, because that feels very oppressive almost when that kicks in.
It's easily like the most accessible side of the whole album for an album that's not really known for its accessibility at all. This would not be a Yes album from start to finish that I would start people with on their journey through Yes music. I would start them with like, you know, Close to the Edge, Fragile, Yes album, even going for the one. But certainly if they're going to pick any part of Tales from Topographic Oceans to listen to see what this record's all about, side one's the easiest way to kind of feel the record out and see what it's all about. And so I think that's one of the reasons why I think it works as the first side. It's like you said, it kind of draws you in. There's nothing really really sort of sharp or protruding about this particular side. Everything kind of makes sense musically, and so I can sort of see this one as being, you know, a fan favorite and certainly one of the easiest parts of the record to listen to for sure.
Yeah. Isn't it interesting, though, that Ritual is the song that got the most staying power in their set lists over the years?
Side one draws you in. It's got that massive keyboard riff that kind of harkens back to Starship Troopers with that bam, 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 da, na, 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 na. Yeah, and exactly. If there's one part of Tales, if somebody just asked me off the top of my head, what I remember, it's always that riff, and then I kind of like think a little bit longer and I remember more. But yeah, it was a good opening for the album.
We must have waited all our lives for this Atmos mix.
Yeah.
So Mike, you want to tell us about side 2?
Sure. So if I was just comparing a moment of side 1 to Starship Troopers, I would say that I lucked out and got the side that most closely resembles And You and I.
Mm-hmm.
It has these like very light and gentle moments. Like the side opens like it's the soundtrack to a fairy dance, for crying out loud. You've got those sparkly arpeggiated guitars up front, and then this bubbly keyboard thing going on all around you.
Pipe organ sound or something.
Eventually, yeah, there's sounds. It sounds like you're dropped into the middle of a circus at one point. But even just during the opening of the track, you've got these very ethereal sounds, cymbal washes. There's this moment during this side where you just feel like you are positively being strafed by cymbal sounds, just going like all, and it goes on for several moments during this amazing mellotron passage. So I was gonna try to get around to saying eventually that I feel like I might have got the side that shifts through moods the most. It has constantly this motif of a very, very long crescendo build to a massive wall of sound mellotron section. And then eventually it breaks out into these rock sections where Alan White and Chris Squire sound positively tough. And even Steve Howe joins in and throws down some distortion, which is, a little on the rare side for him up to this point in their career. So, I definitely got a side that goes through a lot of shifts in mood and tonality and also dynamics. This is an incredibly dynamic side where, I constantly wondered, if they had wanted to end this side here or end this piece here, they could have. Then, this dancing little melody comes back in and it's like you're doing an Irish jig now. And, so Jonathan covered a lot of the mixology in his description of side 1. And, Steven Wilson doesn't always just choose like some arbitrary approach. When the full band is in, a lot of his mixology carries across all 4 sides. So you're going to tend to have Steve Howe's main guitar parts up front in stereo. You're going to tend to have Rick Wakeman all around you. In your flanks and behind you from ear level all the way up to the ceiling sometimes. You're going to tend to have John Anderson in the front center of the room, but not flat. He's brought out a little bit, and he's usually hovering above the main instruments a little bit. And then those heights are going to be used to draw the background vocals up above, up one more layer still. And like we observed earlier in the video, you often have a different set of stereo background vocals up in the front heights than you do in the rear heights. And that's just very intriguing. That rewards a lot of repeated listenings to even try to take in everything that's happening sometimes. But there's always, it feels to me like there's always the proper space for every part. Like even if there are 4 Rick Wakeman parts in at certain times, like he still has plenty of room to insert some Steve Howe overdubs or some vocal, punctuated moments. And that reminds me to talk about one of the standout moments for me of this entire record. I really love it when immersive mixes are, in full blast. You've got all the parts in, especially for a symphonic band like Yes, all 5 members, at full force. I love it. But sometimes when progressive music just hits that stop time and everything goes mute except for one part carries on, that's sometimes where the magic of a mix can really like hit your brain. And I get those 2 sections where John Anderson sings and I do think very well.
Yeah.
And those breakdowns are like some of the most magical moments of this record for me, and definitely something I'll remember if somebody asks me about the immersive mix months from now.
Yeah, and we mentioned that when the last time that enters, Hal kicks in some distortion, and that's something I've never picked up on it in any other version of this album. I don't know why that is. Maybe he was placed somewhere spatially that just made him stand out, but I was like, wow, where did that come from?
Right.
But I may have said at one point that this was my least favorite side of the album. And it all comes down to how repetitive like the first half of it is. But I was reading that John Anderson's intention was to make you feel like you were floating through that first half. And I think that's a really fascinating idea. And it carries out that ocean motif. And it also calls back to side one, of course, which has a similar feeling. But I find this side a tiny bit tallish because you have like the pipe organ sounds. And then you have that moment where the acoustics, where it's repeating and it's repeating, and then it breaks into that acoustic section. And it suddenly becomes like a folk tune, and it becomes very beautiful. I love the journey that this takes you on. Like it lulls you into this sense of like, oh, is this how it's going to be? And then it breaks out into something different. There's more hard rock sections, like you denoted, like you mentioned.
Yeah, I get the mighty relayer passages on my side.
Yeah, right. The relayer stuff, and like this is some of Chris Squire's best bass playing. I mean, I know I said that before, but I think it's unique because he was playing like a fretless here. So it's got a very unique sound and signature to any other Yes track. But yeah, this is quite a magical side, quite a magical section of music here.
Yeah, the drums and bass are happening during that relayer section. Like it really hits.
That's classic Yes.
It's interesting that Mike said that he felt like the previous piece of Yes music, like the side made him most think of was And You and I. I think certainly like the acoustic section, like the Don the Cap and Close Your Eyes, that part, that makes me think of All Good People, like the combination of the acoustic guitars and the shakers. But as far as like the mix goes, one of my favorite parts on the side is there's this section towards the end that's basically just like a big showcase for Wakeman, like with the synth moving all around and above you. I forget like exactly where it happens, but it's like 3/4 of the way in, and that's one of the definitely one of the best parts of the Atmos mix.
Yeah, it's interesting, because you talked about, John Anderson, especially in that first part, wanting almost to imagine floating because, this track is called The Remembering, but in parentheses, it says High the Memory. And so, yeah, it makes you think of, going up higher, floating, and again, like other people have talked about, this is probably the most acoustic side of the whole album, even though there are some heavier passages that kind of work their way through. But yeah, lots of acoustic guitars, lots of, sort of more folk instrumentation compared to, a lot of the other sides on this record.
I just wanted to highlight John Anderson's vocals. Again, I mean, I know I said on side one, he's very soulful. Here it's like a folk tenor at times.
Yeah.
But then on the more intense sections, he really delivers. I think that this side may, as many or more than any other, show that just how unique of a singer and what range that he had in those days. But
before we move on from my side, I just wanted to make the point that, we have been talking about how this record has this sense of height and, even high the memory. It feels like you're supposed to be floating. And I just have to imagine that that's much easier and even more possible to pull off with the use of that Z axis, that, that height channel. You're able to do things literally with height and not just like, with reverbs around ear level. It just opens up the capability to, I think it's really pushed this record to where this record needed to go, just in theme as well as sonically. And
you can tell like it's using like the whole kind of volume of the cube. There are some Atmos mixes where it's kind of like there's the bottom and there's the top. And on this one, you can sense that there's stuff like in between too. like we mentioned, a lot of the backing vocals, like it feels like you're in like a dome or like a sphere of sound. And I think the most successful Atmos mixes give that effect where you start to even forget that the speakers are there, and you're just sort of surrounded by these floating sounds, and you can't necessarily pick out a specific speaker, but like a sort of area of the space that they're in. And that approach works really well for this record.
Yeah. You can almost imagine, being in the studio with Yes, making any of these records, whether it's Close to the Edge or Tales from Topographic Oceans or Relayer. And, probably somebody, of course, like John Anderson would be saying, it's like, oh, I want it to sound like it's coming from all around you or coming from above. And they're like, John, like, come on. But we can't do that. Like, just whatever. So you have to imagine that, obviously, if they would have had the ability to mix, a record like this, in Atmos, where you have sounds not only coming from all around you, but coming up above you, that they would have done that back then if they would have had the chance to do so.
Yeah.
There's not a doubt in my mind.
It's funny that you mention that, because I've always wondered, like, why there wasn't a quad mix of this album or Close to the Edge, because the timeline works for it. And Atlantic Records did release albums in quad, as we know from the Quadio discs and things that were released on vinyl and tape in the 70s. I mean, I guess a lot of people have different theories about that, but my personal theory is just how difficult it would be to remix the album because of what we talked about as far as the tapes and the dropping people in, and how difficult it would be to do another mix. So, but it's too bad, because some Yes stuff coming out in quad, I feel like would have, done the format well. I'm sure a lot of people would have set up quad systems to hear this record or Close to the Edge and surround way back when. Analog mixing is no joke, and I think Eddie Offord deserves all the praise he gets for his work on the Yes catalog and all the other sort of classic prog stuff he did in the 70s.
Yeah. Well, Wilson has taken great pains to recreate what Eddie Offord did back then. So I definitely think he deserves praise and a nod in this video for sure. Are we ready to talk about The Ancient?
Let's do it.
Cool. I decided to talk about The Ancient because I'm out of my mind, number one. But number two, because it is the most experimental, it's the most angular, and it's the most contrasted side all at the same time. And all of these are things that appeal to me. Suffice it to say, this is the finest, I think, example of Atmos mixing on this album for me. And I would go so far to say that demo your system on this if you have somebody who's into weird music.
Don't lead with this. Yeah.
Don't lead with it. If you have somebody who's like really into weird experimental stuff and Dolby Atmos, this might be the thing for them. I don't think I would enjoy doing your job, Jonathan, if I had to write about The Ancient and write down every single thing that's going on, because in the opening, and I'm going to quote Ronan here, Mike, at the opening, we have a gong and it travels all around. And we have like cymbals too, that are like the front right or somewhere around there. And I know this is supposed to be The Ancient, but this always evokes like the Arctic to me. Like it always feels very cold when this opens, even more than Siberian Khatru. Like it feels very, very alien too, like an alien planet. And so you have like this main motif that sounds almost like a marimba part or something. Like I could imagine Ruth Underwood, Mother's Invention, playing this. And some of the, I know that we have a track called The Ritual, but this has got to be some of the most tribal drumming that Alan White plays. I mean, it's very heavy. It lands extremely hard. And again, it's one of those things like, I just can't imagine Bill Bruford playing like that.
No,
this has to be Alan White. And on top of that, you have this really ethereal playing from Steve Howe, and it's almost jazz fusion like, but he hits some power chords again that makes me think of Frank Zappa. And you were mentioning at the end of your side, we get a little bit of power chording, but it's almost like that was leading into this more out there side. There's moments of this that evokes Gentle Giant to me. There's moments of this that evoke King Crimson, which we didn't talk about how Jamie Muir inspired this whole epic. So it fits that you would have this kind of Lark's Tongues and Aspic era King Crimson thing running through the first few minutes. There's even moments of this that make me think of psychedelic era Beatles, some string sounds or some brass sounds that come in at one point. And there are moments where it seems to kind of collapse in on itself in a really interesting way and just kind of crawls. And I know I'm using very in technical terms, but I don't know how else to describe this music to you folks. You know, it kind of collapses in on itself, and then it breaks, and then it becomes this folk song. This really pretty study of contrasts. And it is interesting to me that if you look into the extras on this set, that there was an electric version of the Leaves of Green part with Alan White's drums behind it. But I kind of like it that they left it this very soft, you know, it reminds me of I've Seen All Good People a little bit in parts of And You and I. But then you have this moment where it kind of snaps and there's like guitar parts all around. And I got to say that as impressive as the intro of this, and I didn't mention that tin can sound or whatever it is that's like zigzagging all around. Like I can only imagine, you know, trying to write that pan. Doing it back in the day, because, you know, Steven was copying exactly the radical mixing choices and panning choices of the original. But I can only imagine what that was like, you know, programming that in Atmos. But the very ending of this is one of the most impressive moments of the entire album to me, because it just it's in all speakers, but it just seems like it's traveling upward, dissipating.
Yeah, that's one of the coolest moments on the record in Atmos for sure.
Yeah.
Because they could have just ended it after Leaves of Green, but they give you that one last blast of the main,
Yep.
whatever you want to call that, like the
motif,
refrain motif. Yeah.
It almost reminds me of the Critique Oblique motif in Passion Play.
Mm-hmm. I was going to say it's like when you get the end of We Have Heaven at the end of Fragile, like when the door opens again. It's like that kind of thing.
I mean, I think it's, you know, easily, you know, probably just in terms of musical terms, you know, like you've already alluded to, like the least accessible side. But I always felt, you know, when I was playing this album in surround originally about 10 years ago, and even now, just recently with this new remix that Steven Wilson's done again in 5.1 in Atmos, I really feel like this is the side that's really improved the most.
Yes.
From the original stereo mix. It's almost like now this track makes a little bit more sense now that you have more space to move things, you know, around you. And, you know, we talked about it earlier where we found that the original stereo mix was, you know, a little bit, I don't know, say dull, a little bit more boxed in like we talked about. And I always felt that this was the side out of all the sides in the album original stereo that just always just sounded the worst to me. It just never really got into the way this sounded originally. So I like the fact that Steven's kind of, you know, I don't know whether he's kind of purposefully brightened it up a little bit, or maybe that's just how it was on the multi-track tapes, because they were mixing for vinyl back then. So obviously you couldn't have quite as low frequencies or as high frequencies as you can, you know, on these newer digital mixes. So I like the fact that it, you know, it sounds a little bit brighter. It's not as, you know, boxed in as before. And I like the fact that you can kind of take all these weird parts and weird instruments and kind of, you know, spread them around and do some really interesting things with it, even more than you can in stereo. It's almost like of all the sides, this side probably was the side that was probably most made for this kind of mix.
Yeah.
I mean, I would take that even further. Like a lot of people debate, like what is really the merits of Atmos? Like is 5.1 good enough? And there's things that happen particularly in this side where like you could not achieve that effect in a 5.1 mix. Mm-hmm. Like at the beginning of the track, for instance, you mentioned the circling marimba thing. So there are actually two things circling at the same time, one in the top and one in the bottom. So I think there's like the metallic, like trash can symbol thing is moving around the bottom 7, and then the marimba is moving around the top 4 at the same time, which I've never heard that done before. 2 spinning pans in different sections of the room. You mentioned the Gentle Giant connection, and I agree. There's the section around the 7-minute mark, maybe, that's like completely like, for a second, I'm like, is that Kerry Manier's synth? Like, it's got that exact sound, that sort of like computery synth. It's hard to describe what it's like.
Sine wave. And yeah, it's like Gentle Giant. And I think that's kind of one of the interesting things about this side. You know, I feel like Yes's music is kind of like its own thing, and I don't really feel them being influenced by a lot of the other prog bands. I mean, maybe, you know, Tull for some of the more acoustic sections. Yeah. But this section is like, I'm like, oh, like they were listening to what other people were doing. Like, yeah. Well, I believe Tull opened for Yes on Close to the Edge in some places, and
I think I think flip that around. I think
Yes
71. I think Yes opened for Jethro Tull when Jethro Tull were doing Aqualung, because I know that, you know, John Anderson, you know, they would do their opening set or whatever. Then John Anderson would watch Ian Anderson perform, and he would really see, it's like, oh, okay, from night to night he's kind of doing the same thing at certain parts during the show. It's a performance, but there's a little bit of a choreography to it. I think he really leaned into, you know, some of the performance stuff that Ian Anderson was doing up on stage with Tull.
Yeah,
but I've always thought of, like, when you think about all the different bands that were operating in the space, it's kind of like King Crimson was the darkness and Yes was the light. You know, like the Yes music, it's generally like sort of happy sounds, you know, sympathetic frequencies. And this song is like, it's kind of ugly. Like, you know, the way that Steve Howe plays that lead slide guitar part, like it's kind of dissonant. I dare say maybe it's like a little out of tune. And it's you know, it's purposefully done, and it sounds kind of dissonant and kind of ugly. And I think that's what they were going for with this piece. And that's, you know, very much a Crimson thing, to use a lot of dissonance in the music. But go ahead.
You know, you call it ugly, but at the same time, I'm very enthused by this kind of music. So what does that say about me? I'm not sure.
This is the most percussive of the 4 sides, and that's not only because you have tribal rhythms from Alan White, but you also have additional percussion elements that it's just the percussion is laid down here thicker than on the other 3 sides. And also the other band members are quite punctuated in, you know, you get these vocal stabs, you get these bass stabs, you get these drum stabs, keyboard stabs. So it's very percussive, and you lucked out because you got the side with dancing percussion. Anytime you go and send percussion dancing around me, I'm just gonna have a blast, okay? And then I really love how this side hands off to side 4. You know, you get that bonk, 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 you know, percussive type of thing going on with this side. This side refuses to break into a groove for the whole 20-something minutes. And then side 4 comes in with that big bonk, and you think you're going to get more of the same, but it settles into more of a groove. Yeah. So, yeah, side 3 is very cool. And, you know, talking about additional percussion, this is when 5.1 can really help with a really, really thick arrangement. And it's when Atmos can help even more in that, you know, like there's some King Crimson lineups where they had 2 drummers or more. And I think it was like on the Thrack record where you get in 5.1, you get 1 drummer up front and the other one in the surrounds. Exactly. And so it just, it gives them the breathing room that is needed so that you can really take in the whole kit and not really be missing a lot of detail.
So is there anything else we want to say about this side in regards to comparing it to the 5.1 mix? Because I don't remember the 5.1 mix being nearly this active in terms of panning.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I would also say that the added warmth of the Atmos mix helps make it more tolerable, especially if you crank the volume.
Agreed.
Yeah. And this is a very crankable side for me. You know, that main motif, that bam, bam, I have to have that hit my soul.
Absolutely.
So Ryan, I think it's time for side 4.
That's right. The finale.
Bring us home, Ryan.
Ritual. Now I'm going to start off by maybe disagreeing a little bit with something that I think Mike said while talking about the Ancient, where he said that, that particular side is the most percussive, because I don't know. I mean, we're going to get to the part in Relayer that's sort of the big percussion sort of breakdown section, but there's a whole lot of other percussion stuff that's going on, on this particular side as well too. So I would almost say that this side is, the most percussive and most drum heavy. And I think as Ian alluded to earlier, and I was going to mention this anyway, this particular side of the album called Ritual, Yes performed this side live in concert more than any other side of this record. I mean, I think this played roughly about 350 times, throughout the 50-something years that this album's been out. They played it very consistently from the time this record came out until, the end of 1976, at which point, Rick Wakeman had left the group and then had rejoined at the end of that year, and then they made Going for the One. They wouldn't play this side again until about 25 years later, around the year 2000. They did a tour called the Masterworks Tour, where I think they were presenting a lot of these bigger, longer pieces all in one concert setting, like this and Close to the Edge and Gates of Delirium and Awaken.
I was fortunate enough to see that tour.
Yeah. And then they continued playing this side the following year when they did the Yes Symphonic Tour off of the Magnification record, where they were playing on stage with an orchestra. That's one live version that I would recommend that people check out, because I love the way the real orchestra kind of adds in, with what they're doing musically. Then they also played this side with Rick Wakeman again in 2004 for the 35th anniversary tour. And that was the first time that I heard this particular piece of music, because it was the DVD from that tour in 2004. That was one of the very first things that I ever bought from Yes. So the fact that they played that side live on that tour, that was kind of my first introduction to not only this piece of music, but to Tales from Topographic Oceans in general. And it happens basically kind of towards the very end of their set. And I remember listening to it and thinking, oh, that was weird. That was interesting. Little did I know, when I would eventually hear the rest of the record, of course, what would, come on some of these other sides that I hadn't checked out yet. But, this piece of music, I think it's clear when you listen to not only the original studio recording, but all these other live recordings of this piece of music, that this is just a piece of music that just really works well, in the live setting. I think maybe apart from Jonathan's side that he talked about, side one, the Revealing Science of God, I feel like this side is more just of the band just playing together and really getting into a vibe, really getting into a groove, pretty much right from, where this piece begins. I like how, in both of the 5.1 mixes, because I compared them both, when John Anderson's first vocal part comes in, which isn't even really like a melody with lyrics. It's just almost like a rhythmic, melodic vocal part, but it's the da 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 da.
It's like scatting, sort of. Yeah.
I mean, that comes like strictly from behind you. Like, you don't get that like in any of the front speakers at all. And I thought that was very nice, interesting choice. But there's also a lot of other interesting percussion parts throughout, especially a lot of congas and other things like that. Another thing I will say about both of the 5.1 mixes is that they keep the drums for this one mostly, the main drum kit mostly in the front, but of course they have all these other percussion effects, around you and back of you. And same is true with the vocals. So in the 5.1 mixes, John Anderson's vocals are basically primarily totally up front. And then when you get the harmony vocals from both Chris Squire and Steve Howe, they're basically completely behind you. Now that's a little bit different to what he did with the new Atmos mix, where I found that he's kind of kept all of the vocals together and kind of brought all the vocals just more into the room and also above you as well too. There's not that sort of, front versus back dichotomy with John in the front and other guys in the back. It's like the vocals are a little bit more congealed together in the Atmos mix, which I know that's something, Mike, that you mentioned about how you like these newer mixes from Steven Wilson a little bit more than the older ones, is that he's done that. He hasn't pulled them apart as much. He's kind of kept them together. But it is interesting sometimes when you listen to both of the 5.1 mixes and you hear both Chris and Steve behind you, you can kind of hear a little bit more clearly what they're doing vocally. I mean, especially Steve Howe, for somebody who I never really, considered to be much of a singer. No offense, Steve. He's got some really interesting vocal parts that he's doing. And I always thought that some of the parts, that he was doing were parts that Chris were doing. And it's like, oh, wait a second. No, that doesn't sound like Chris. That sounds like Steve, is doing some of these parts. And you kind of hear that a little bit more clearly, in these surround mixes. Now, probably the section that's most appreciated in surround of this whole piece of music, both in 5.1, but especially with this new Atmos mix, is what I don't know how to classify this any other way, but I call it the percussion breakdown freak out section.
Yeah.
I mean, I just don't know how else to describe it. I mean, basically, pretty much, for the most part, all the traditional instrumentation kind of folds away and disappears for the most part, except for the drums and percussion. And it starts with that kind of tinkly percussion part that, in the 5.1 mixes is basically just completely behind you. Whereas for the Atmos mix, Steven has moved that part up to the heights, which is kind of a nice contrast, when Alan White's drum kit comes in, at sort of ground level, but you've got the sort of tinkly percussion still going up above you. And I mean, if you watch basically Yes playing this piece of music on stage, throughout their whole career of playing it, and I think the only person that's not playing anything at this section is Steve on guitar. Like, he's not doing anything at all. The keyboard player, whether it's Rick or, whoever else they've had in their live configurations, he comes in at times, with various kind of weird dissonant chords. But other than that, I mean, everybody else is basically playing, whether it's Alan White with his big drum kit, or whether it's, Chris Squire, with a pair of timpani drums on stage, or John Anderson, with all these, various percussion parts that he's hitting. It really is almost kind of like a little bit of a free-for-all percussion section, which again works so well both in each of the 5.1 mixes, but also especially with this new Atmos mix, where Steven Wilson has the opportunity to basically spread all these different percussion parts around you while still keeping, for the most part, Alan White's main drum kit, powerful and centered and anchored at the front. But after that, it's almost kind of like I describe that section as almost being like in the midst of a storm. And then after that, when you get that D major chord coming back in again and Howe's lead guitar part, it goes into this really nice section at the end where, John's playing acoustic guitar. There's a nice, piano that's kind of happening all throughout the track, and John's singing a wonderful vocal melody again. Before you get to what I think is probably one of my favorite parts of not only this piece of music, but the whole Tales from Topographic Oceans album in general, which is that lovely bit of guitar playing that Steve Howe does at the very end of this side, where he's playing a wonderful lead line, and it's going through all these different chord changes that you just wouldn't even think, when looking at this on a piece of music, that, that these chords could make sense leading from one to another. And another thing I want to finish off with musically is the fact that some of the previous Yes records ended, I guess, on what I'd consider a little bit of a happier, lighter note, whether it's the ending of Perpetual Change or bringing back in We Have Heaven at the end of Fragile, or the very, very long jam fading out on Siberian Cat True. This one ends a little bit darker, a little bit more dour, because the very last chord that the band, kind of fade out on is F sharp minor. So it's almost just like, it's a little bit different compared to the beginning of the record where you're kind of, easing into it, but it's a little bit more hopeful. This record almost kind of ends, with that F sharp minor chord on a little bit of a sadder, kind of more melancholy feel to it after you've just gone on this journey for like 80 plus minutes of all these various changes. That's kind of what they leave you with. But again, throughout that whole section, Steve Howe is some of his best playing, I think, that he's done, not only on this record, but on any NES record. I just want to say in closing that when I first heard this album in 5.1 about 10 years ago, I felt that of all the albums that Steven Wilson mixed in 5.1 throughout this period of years, I felt like this record probably had the biggest leap in improvement from original stereo mix to 5.1 mix. And now I feel like this record has also had the biggest improvement and leap from 5.1 surround to Atmos. It's like, the more, speakers you have, it's almost just like this record just makes more and more sense finally. So I'd say if you haven't really given this record a fair shot at all, or maybe if you listened to it in 5.1 maybe 10 years ago when that mix came out, you thought, that's all right, but I'm going to go play Close to the Edge or something by a whole nother progressive rock group. I would give this record another try, particularly if you have the advantage of listening to it with speakers above you. I think you'll find a big difference.
Yes, and I will add to that even the stereo mix that's included with this package is a huge improvement over the old one. So
Agreed.
if you just have two speakers, it doesn't matter. You're going to hear an improvement. Now, I'll be brief because I think you said some beautiful things there about this album and that side itself. But I feel like this is the side that sums up everything that you've just heard and contextualizes it.
Yes.
And it has the accessibility of Revealing Science of God, and it has the range of a Remembering, and it has even the experimentation and edge of the Ancient, but it's tied together with a lot of melodicism. There's a lot of interesting effects going on. I wanted to mention that some of the moments where Steve Howe is playing completely soloistically, he's quoting other Yes numbers.
Yeah.
And you'll notice he quotes a bit of Close to the Edge.
He does. You're right.
And that's really interesting. He quotes, because the whole concept, when this started was he and John Anderson wanted to write 4 Close to the Edges. So it was kind of an interesting idea to connect it musically even to Close to the Edge. Yeah. But you do hear quotes from all the other pieces in there. Again, I remember reading at one point that Yes felt a little bit insecure when Gentle Giant opened for them because they were such tremendous musicians and very inventive and creative too. And I have to wonder if the 5-man drum ensemble thing, which Gentle Giant did, and I want to say it was So Sincere. You can hear it on the Playing the Fool album, and there's an Atmos mix of that too, where you can hear the 5 guys all around you. But that's what that evoked the most to me, was the Giants again. Yeah.
I mean, you guys had said before that you thought the Remembering was the piece that goes through the most mood changes, but I would say it's this one. I mean, it's crazy what you think about what the structure of this piece is. Like it starts off with this kind of neat instrumental jam that starts to sort of pick up in tempo when those scatting vocals come in. Then it switches to like this sort of beautiful sort of vocal harmonies and guitar section, the Nos sommes de soleil, if that's how you say it.
Yeah, I think you nailed it.
there's a section where Chris Squire takes a bass solo in the song, which is neat. Mm-hmm. And in the Steven Wilson mixes, in both the old one and the new one, that solo is a little bit extended relative to the original stereo mix, which is interesting. And somehow it morphs from the bass solo into that percussion thing. And like by the time you get into the middle of the section of the drums, it's like, how did we even get here? Like that, at least that's how I feel when I'm listening to it. But I agree with, Ian's point that it kind of sums up everything you've heard on the record so far, and somehow it managed to do it in a coherent way, which is kind of unbelievable. But I mean, the big question for me going to this track is I was wondering, like, what was the drum part going to sound like in Atmos? Because I mean, in the 5-1 mix, it's kind of like Ryan was saying, it's like the sort of chimey things are in the back and the rest of the drums are in the front. But in this version, it's kind of like those chimey things that were in the back are now in the top, and they seem to move around a little bit too. And then all those big, like, sort of tom, or are they like timpani, those big drum hits are kind of moving all around you on the bottom. So I guess it's another good example of like what we were talking about in side 3. There's different things moving in the top and bottom at the same time. We kind of mentioned him a little bit at the beginning of the video. The person not on this record, which is the original drummer, Bill Bruford, had left Yes after they finished recording Close to the Edge. So he didn't even tour Close to the Edge at all with them, and then had, pretty much nothing to do, with any of the material that you hear on this record. And he said that, because I know he's been asked about it a few times in interviews, he said he's never heard this record at all, and it's not because he's got any axe to grind. He likes all the guys, but, he had just moved on at that time. But I think out of all the sides on this album that he probably would have fit in probably the best on, it probably would have been this side, Ritual. I know it wouldn't have been side 2 or side 3, that's for sure. But I feel like this side he probably would have fit in the best on for sure.
I kind of feel like I'm in love with this album now, thanks to this presentation, because it's allowed it's made the whole record more accessible, closer for me. It's invited me in.
This album needed the most help in terms of, surround, wow, or immersion to like try to draw me in. Going into the surround, first round of surround mixes from Steven Wilson, I went in liking this one the least out of all the albums that were on the table there. And especially now that the Atmos mix is out, this is now probably my second favorite classic Yes album. It's really elevated it for me.
I mean, I can only reiterate, what Ryan was saying at the end of talking about side 4, which is that, like, if you had the 2016 edition and like it didn't really do it for you, or you thought it was just okay, I think this is a good example of, however many speakers you have, whether you have 512 or 714, even if you just have 51, I think this is like a really good example of what going back and redoing a 5.1 mix in Atmos can bring to the table. I mean, as someone who's lucky enough to have the full 714 thing, I mean, like I said, there's sort of sensations and effects in this record that you cannot achieve just with a regular 5.1 mix. And not every record would be suited for such an extreme mix like this.
Technology has evolved tremendously since the first time this was remixed into multi-channel, and so has Steven Wilson. He has evolved as well, and this is an extremely exciting time. I really feel right now that if Steven Wilson's name appears on one of your favorite records, you are a very lucky person, because you are going to be in for an outstanding experience that's going to deliver. And, he said, Jonathan, in your interview that, there's always someone who knows the record better than him. And there's, you can't please everyone with every mix. And I get that. But I'm just trying to say that from my perspective, I try to be a reasonable guy. And, I feel like he also said that sometimes there's a reason why an engineer has to do what they do. Like, they may have tried what you wanted them to do and it just fell apart and it just didn't work. And they didn't want to put out a mix with their name on it if it doesn't work, So I have to say that within, reasonable framing, he is delivering the mixes that surround and immersive enthusiasts really want, because he is one and he knows what he's doing.
Yeah. And one thing I wanted to add was, at least to the discussion on Ritual, is something that really helps to send this album home and kind of make me feel, satiated by it, is the fact that climactic solo at the end of Ritual has been brought up in the mix. Something has been done there that makes it feel like a climax in a way that it never has before. So with this new version of the album, you have an intro that draws you in slowly and kind of allows that mantra to wash over you. It takes you on this immersive journey. And then by the end of it, you feel like you've reached something. And I think that that's a big part of the success of this mix.
I mean, sort of just judging by like the discourse I've seen online, it seems like with regards to the albums, the Yes records that Steven has mixed in, he has remixed in stereo or 5.1 or Atmos now, that it seems like for the Yes album, Fragile and Close to the Edge, like most people feel like the original mixes of those were really good. Yeah, like a lot of people are so passionate about them that they feel like it's sacrilege to even remix them. Yeah. Whereas these later ones, Topographic and Relayer, are the two where there seems to be some consensus maybe that the originals didn't sound as good as they could have. Yeah. I'm not sure like what the specific reasons for that were, time, budget. Maybe in the case of this record, they just sort of tracked too much stuff and it just sort of started to sound cluttered when you would try to fit it into stereo. So I think what we've all been getting at is even if you put aside the surround piece of it, this is probably the one that sounds the most different relative to the original.
Yes, agreed.
Not just in terms of like things being turned up or turned down volume wise, but I think the EQ of it is very different. Yeah, relative to the original. So yeah, I figured that was worth bringing up.
Well, it makes me really anticipate Relayer. Because that's another one that I haven't spent a whole lot of time with the surround mix, but I might say that is the one outlier of Steven Wilson mixes that I haven't quite been won over by yet. Obviously, it's getting enough attention. I think even beyond the surround mix, I think this is the best box set that Rhino has put out of Yes, because these live tracks are fascinating. The early versions are, if you'll excuse the pun, revealing. It just as a package, I think it's terrific, and there's no mistakes on it in the audio, like there was with the concert on the Close to the Edge box. So I hope that this sells well enough that Rhino wants to do Relayer, because I think it belongs on my shelf, and I think of all of them, it's the one that could definitely could stand for some improvement.
I bet we're going to get Relayer, and I bet Wilson's going to crush it.
Yeah, that would be my prediction as well. Yeah. It's like I said on our forthcoming video, every Steven Wilson mix is the best ever until the next Steven Wilson remix.
Well, it'll be interesting because on the song The Gates of Delirium, in the first 5.1 mix, we don't know if there's going to be another one, but in the 5.1 mix from 2014, there are those like the percussion, those like trash can sounds that are missing.
They're cars.
Whatever
it's sound effects. Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about. The sort of the battle in the Gates of Delirium. And at the time they had said that those were not on the multi-track tapes. I don't know if they were flown in like directly on the mix, or if there's
probably so. Yeah.
There's another sort of tape, there's another reel of tape that's missing or something. But it'll be interesting if he mixes that record again, if they can restore those by extracting them from the stereo mix with AI stem separation. Yeah. I think that would be an interesting experiment to try. And the other record I think that could do with a new mix, if they had the tapes for it, is Going for the One.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Love that album.
And of course, as you saw in the interview with Steven, I would love to hear Owner of a Lonely Heart in surround.
Yeah,
I think it would be incredible.
Drama.
Yeah.
Mentioned drama before, but guys, this has been awesome. I want to thank you all for joining me. And for those of you who have been watching at home, I want to thank you for joining us as well. Don't forget to click on the subscribe button at the bottom of the video and make sure you're subscribed to all 3 channels, which are collaborating here. So once again, that's Life in Surround with Mike and Immersive Audio Album with Jonathan. I have more collaborations planned with these gentlemen, so you're going to want to be subscribed to those channels so you don't miss it. Mike, you want to preview some of the stuff we're working on? Jonathan, too?
Sure. Yeah, I have my co-review with Ian for The Raven That Refused to Sing coming up this Sunday.
Nice.
And I think it was just a great talk. I had a great time, so think that everyone else should enjoy it too.
Yeah, that was a blast.
It really comes alive in Atmos, doesn't it, that record?
Oh man.
Yeah.
Yeah, it does. It's a dream come true for me.
Well, Ian and I are going to be doing a sort of FAQ about digital file playback, given all the excitement around both Steven's headphone dust store and also what I've been doing at immersiveaudioalbum.com. So we're going to try to give like a sort of primer about the best way to approach, digital downloads in Atmos and 5.1, what gear you should get. And personally, my argument as to why I think they're kind of the way forward to get a lot of this stuff out. So that'll be interesting to talk about. And I should also plug, a lot of the people who are watching this have probably already seen it already, but the interview I did with Steven, which is out on my channel.
Yeah,
it's a really good one.
It's fantastic. And it's doing really well. Once again, let us know in the comments below what you think of Tales from Topographic Oceans in Dolby Atmos. Even if you don't have an Atmos system, just let us know what you think of the box set in general, the new mixes. Let us know if you're excited for Relayer being a potential release, because who knows? I'm guessing that Rhino is using some sort of data scraping technology, and they can see that we're talking about this. So, make your voices heard for sure.
Bring on Relayer.
Bring on Relayer. Release Relayer. Hashtag. But until then, it's been lots of fun, and I'm looking forward to the next time the four of us are together again. So, thanks again, guys. Appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Take care.
Yeah, thanks for having us, Ian.
Anytime.